looking over your shoulder, see where the ball's at.
Yeah, but there's so much to it that I think volume is important. And I think that's a good segue for us, like thinking about this next topic, is not only is volume important, but range of motion. And I honestly think like resistance curves are very important when it comes to hypertrophy training, whether you want to look at it from in general going to the gym or like putting on mass on an underdeveloped athlete, or we look at it from like a rehab perspective. Like you need volume, number one. And I
Mhm.
think you need like quality volume in the sense of like we want good full range of motion as much as possible. We want to induce blood flow. We want the time under tension. We want the I'm get this is Christian French's time to shine because we are talking about hypertrophy training in this moment right now. And look at the shoulder on this guy. It just twitched and I think for a moment there I saw a blood vessel the size of a spaghetti noodle go through the hoodie.
Yeah, I mean, as a meathead, this is definitely one of my favorite topics to like learn about and like talk about. Um, the strength curves are interesting. It's basically like think about like strength curve is like how much force your body can produce at a certain joint angle, and it's a little bit different for. They can be different for like certain movements, and all muscles essentially have like a strength curve. They're going to be stronger in some positions versus others. Typically, you're going to be strongest kind of other. It's at like the muscle's resting length and kind of at mid range. So take for example like you're doing like a bicep curl. Usually, the bicep curl is it tends to be like kind of easy at the start, hard in the middle, and then a little bit easier once you get to the top. So there's doing a little bit of research. You can find these articles online, but there's essentially like three types of like strength curves. You got ascending, descending, and then kind of like the U inverted U shape or like the parabolic. Essentially, like if you think about the vertical axis is the joint angle, and then the horizontal is like the amount of force you're putting in. Can't speak. Um, and like your ascending, descending, and then like that inverted U. So like an ascending. A good example of that could be like a bench or a squat. Essentially, like the further you get to the top of that rep or like extension, quote unquote, whether it's like elbow extension or like extension of the knees and the hips, the easier it's going to be. The bottom of the squat is where it feels the hardest. The bottom of the bench is where it feels the hardest. Like usually, if you get, how many times have you failed a squat above like parallel? Like usually you fail it in the hole below parallel at parallel. Same thing with a bench. Sometimes you might fail a bench like right before the
Near
lockout,
lockout.
which just means you need to do more triceps.
Triceps.
Honestly, like no joke. But usually like people just get stapled and they can't get it off the chest, or they're getting it like a little bit off their chest. So you put an interesting thing like tissue response with cables, and do we think that cables versus bands versus free weights versus machines, does that matter when it comes to training hypertrophy in specific? And why does that matter?
See this is where I have a couple of questions. And this is I can't wait to hear you just go into a spiral here. I like if I'm I love like isolation work with the cables.
Mm,
Number one, I definitely feel, and this is where like you can also differ what kind of cables. Like, are you using like the 1080 Quantum that you guys have, which I'm so jealous of, where that is consistent across the entire strength curve? Or do you have that like a little inertia that kind of gets easier? Or you have a band where it's so easy at the start and it's only, at the very last end of that curve is where it gets tension. Like if when you're looking at that, are you essentially looking at it as like movement by movement? Does this matter? Does it not matter? Or are you going like, hey, I'm in isolation work. I want, an extension of that press. So we have that tricep work in a sense. I'm always going to want the finish to feel hard versus like a bicep curl or, like a hamstring curl, seated or laying,
mm,
whoever it is. Seated's king, but whatever. you're always like cable or, you know, a machine with like a plate loaded, in a sense to where like you want full tension all the way through, like with that length tension relationship. Like when you approach that both as like the meathead in your own training or when you're putting an athlete through training, how are you considering the equipment at hand in order for those movements versus like this is ideal, this is like what I want out of this, or like this is just what we have? And obviously being where you're at, you can go a little bit more towards the prior now.
Yeah. No, it's a good question because like obviously like you don't always look at it as like, all right, what's the best thing I can do for muscle hypertrophy specifically for an athlete? It's important, but it's also like you have certain things. I view it as like certain things is like you're trying to get outputs. Usually the best things to do like for just like pure force output is going to be like barbells, sometimes dumbbells, depending on the exercise. And then I will tend to go like towards more machines for, I don't even want to say like hypertrophy work because I think people think that hypertrophy work has to be high reps, super big range of motion when like really you can put on size from low repetitions from sets of like 3 to
Yeah,
5. Really like muscular like tension is
the big
is the
deal.
main is the main thing that happens, is the main thing that like matters when it comes to hypertrophy. Um typically like I said, like barbells are going to be better for just pushing like pure raw output. They may not be, and it depends on the exercise too. Like you mentioned like a leg curl. That would be like a good example of like a descending like strength curve. It's usually harder as you near like the full joint close position. So like the end of a leg curl where you're really trying to like whatever, have your heels, have your calves like touch your hamstrings. That's going to be the hardest part. Usually you can get it off the pins, but it's hard to finish that rep. And then, like I said, like curls, that would be more of that like inverted U shape where it's like it feels easier at both the endpoints of the movement and then harder in the middle. So it's like easy, difficult, and then back to kind of easy as you get towards the top. I would say in general, like I'm gonna probably favor like machines if I want to work more like end ranges of motion, but whether that's like a cable or like a plate or a like stack loaded machine, just because you're gonna get a little bit more like a cable, you're gonna have a little bit more constant tension throughout the movement, depending on where the cable, like where like the line of force is, like where you're pulling it from, versus like take example for like a pec fly. If you do a dumbbell pec fly, most of the resistance is going to be from when you're in that fully stretched position to about here. You're not really getting a whole lot of resistance when the dumbbells. They're not really getting any resistance when the dumbbells are touching each other on like at the top. Versus like if you go on a cable or a pec deck where you're going to get resistance through that pretty much that full range of motion because it's going to be the tension and the line of force is just going to be a little bit different. Um, some people will say, there's been a lot of like people will do like the reverse band setup on certain things to try to like match like the resistance curve and the strength profile of certain exercises, whether that's like a leg press or something like that, to make it essentially like, and you see this a lot, just people trying to rig up machines to match these profiles, which I think is cool. Essentially, like you can think of like a lat pull down. Usually, it's pretty easy at the start. It gets really hard when you're trying to pull from like here to get the bar to touch your chest. So people might want to have it be okay, a little more heavy here, and then have it get lighter once it gets to the part where it's like more difficult to pull. Maybe if you're going for like strict, if you're like a bodybuilder and like people are starting to make machines that like are optimizing for this, that probably matters. I think for like athletes, I don't look at it quite that specifically, just because like one, the general goals are like okay, increased overall force output, and then like tissue resiliency when it comes to like the weight room exercises. So when I'm thinking like max output, I'm thinking probably more mid-range exercises, whether that's just like a regular squat or even like a pin squat, a regular bench, or like a pin bench, just for like two examples, or like a heavy like dumbbell row, a heavy chin up. And then resilience wise, you're probably going to use stuff that's going to touch like longer muscle lengths, so end range, whether that's like a pec fly or a dumbbell pullover or something like a super range of motion like split squat where the front foot's elevated, something like that. obviously it's going to depend on like what you have access to. Dumbbells and barbells are pretty universal at most gyms. Not everyone is going to have like a 1080 quantum. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a sick piece of equipment to use. Um, but I don't think it's like super necessary. And it's also like we have two quantum like columns, and we have a lot more athletes than two. So we will use it in training, but it's also like you can't use that for everyone. And I tend to kind of like go
Yeah.
towards I'll tend to kind of like go towards like our more like advanced quote unquote athletes will use the quantum a little bit more, just because like one, you can get really high outputs without like, because we have it like attached like a Smith machine essentially, and you can use it with or without like an eccentric boost. So essentially like you could do like a max effort deadlift where you limit the like an isokinetic where you're doing the speed at whatever point 0 like 0.2 meters per second. It's like a max effort pull, but you could just do the concentric. You're not getting the eccentric stress. So it's a good way to like push very high force outputs without like, you're still going to be kind of buried, but not the same as like you're not getting that eccentric stress. So that's kind of my general thought on it is
There's
gen-
a there was a point that you kind of brought up before you wrap on that, and it was like the at length portion of it. Like,
mhm.
how much of an emphasis do you play, even in just your own training, on the tension length relationship, or like the at length like extreme value of tension in that end range versus obviously at very close proximal joint
Yeah, more
angles.
like mid range, just like
Yeah.
normal range of motion exercises. I would say like in my own training, I probably bias it a little bit more just because one, like I enjoy some of those like exercises, like whatever it's like pec flies or like, a deficit deadlift or something like that. One, because obviously like
Look at this guy,
you
he's
read
juiced.
like, yeah, like it's probably like a little bit better for hypertrophy, but also
Hmm.
it's like the resilient side of the spectrum, right? Like,
Anti-fragile.
yeah, like you want to be able to like expose your tissues and be strong at those longer muscle lengths. Like I might not be the most like flexible or whatever, flexible, mobile, whatever you want to call it, person in the world, but I
Hmm.
feel like I'm like decently strong at the range that I do have. And I would take people that are like strong throughout their full range versus just like having a lot of range of motion but not being super strong throughout it. Um, I think that that's kind of like underemphasized sometimes in athletes training, specifically like in baseball, like with like the shoulder girdle in particular, like whatever it's like pec, rotator cuff, delt, especially when you think about guys that are like throwing every day, whether it's like a pitcher or even like a position player. Like it's a lot of stress on the elbow and the shoulder. I think you need to be smart with like how you dose it, but like exposing like whether it's the pec in like a fully stretched position, whether it's here or like a super deep like parallel bar push up, rotator cuff at length, whether that's like a seated, like single arm lat pull down with a lot of like lateral flexion or like a single arm hang. I think it's definitely underrated. Like, yeah, you need to like push outputs with like probably like more mid range exercises, but I think if you don't like expose athletes to those like end range positions and like build strength at those end ranges, they're probably going to be a little bit more susceptible to like the soft tissue stuff. Just kind of my like general thoughts. Like, obviously, you have to be a little bit like more cognizant of those things because like you're going to get more of a stretch. You're probably going to have a little bit more east like DOMs from just like the eccentric portion of the movement. But I think it's important to train all things at all time. I mean, I think we're all kind of like a fan of like the vertical integration, but I think it kind of gets overlooked sometimes. In the weight room, we just say like, okay, we did our like horizontal press, we did our horizontal pull, we checked all the movement boxes, but we don't think about like, did we train all the muscles at where they're the strongest, but also like where they're the weakest? Did we train them short, and no, do we also train them long? I think that kind of gets overlooked sometimes. Whether that's whatever muscle group it is.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of like ask on that. Like, where do you think like not necessarily the value, because you've definitely talked about the value, but where do you think the shortcomings are? Is that like an education standpoint? Do you think that's like people just negating it or being ignorant on like just not considering, did we train the muscle short? Did we train the muscle long? Like, are we looking for extreme ranges of motion at those at some points in time in order to have, vertical integration doesn't necessarily include like the range of motion or the joint angles that you're operating in with inside the weight room. But I do you think there's an argument to kind of like include that in there of like you should be doing at least something at some capacity in order to maintain that?
I do. I don't know if it's just because like we don't think about it. Like we don't think about training athletes the way that we would train like whatever, like a bodybuilder. We just think like, oh, like they pushed, they pulled, they squatted, they hinged. Like we don't think about like, oh, like they hit this at mid range, they hit it at end range. I think it's part of we just don't think about it that way. I wouldn't say like maybe it's partly because of ignorance. Probably it's also like time constraints, equipment.
Yeah.
But I think you can. I think the equipment, like if you have barbells and dumbbells, you can pretty much do anything. Um, and like obviously, like I'm not saying like you need to like do a crazy amount of like full range work that's going to make you crazy sore. But I think even like touching those ranges, whether it be in like some sort of like quote unquote loaded mobility or like a lower intensity movement, or even like paired with like a compound, I think that can go a long ways. As far as like how often you need to do it, that's tough. I would want to do it like the same like I would want to do it once. Same thing like once a week for like your main, depending on the sport too. Kind of like your main. I don't want to say like your main muscle groups that are used in sport because every sport uses every muscle group, but like it's crazy, especially I think especially after people come off like a serious injury, they tend to not want to like expose themselves to like that like range. Like for example, like people that have maybe had like a shoulder surgery, they're like, all right, I don't do like full range of motion like bench press anymore. I only do floor press. I only do dumbbells. And I would argue that you're putting yourself at a greater risk of re-injury by not trying to expose that range and get it strong at like end ranges versus just like avoiding it. And that might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but I really believe that.
I think so. I guess when you come into this and you look at it from like you had mentioned those mid range exercises with compound movements. When we look at it from a force, how much are you biasing more of the resiliency aspect or that traditional what we would kind of classify as like hypertrophy work or the robustness in the tissue when it comes to a rehab setting, and you're like bringing an athlete back either early rehab, late stage, whatever, like where does that like split kind of, where does that lie, and where do you kind of begin those transitions of maybe we start far more resiliency based and like small ranges of motion or long ranges of motion, very deep but a little bit lighter, etc., kind of working through, like what does that look like from like your perspective?
I think one, it depends on like what the injury is and what the limitations are obviously at the start. Like if a guy is like, for example, like if it's an ACL and like, or like, for example, like we had a guy with like had a hernia repair not too long ago. It's not like a super serious injury, but it did require surgery. Like, for example, like he couldn't like do full range of motion squats because that would have like potentially like reopened the incision. So like for a guy like that, you maybe can't do as much like full range work, especially even with like the lower half. So maybe you're gonna take what you can get and do pain squats and try to build like more output there. But generally, what I would think is like early on in the rehab process, general capacity, and I'm like focused on, I would bias towards more hypertrophy work. It also depends on how much time you're gonna have with the guy. And then as you get like closer to maybe that return, you're going to work towards more like general strength and then more like power expression. Obviously, all things will be in the program at all times, but I would definitely bias, especially I would definitely bias the hypertrophy more because like especially in baseball, I'm not saying you can't like target that in season, but I think it's easier to do that like in a rehab setting where like you're not really doing much sporting activity and you have a lot more stress to allocate towards training. And I would want to like take advantage of that, especially with a guy like who needs to put on mass, for example. So I would probably bias that heavily towards the hypertrophy, while also knowing that like just because you do a set of super like an end range exercise for high reps doesn't mean that you're only getting hypertrophy. Like you're getting a little bit of everything all the time. Like you build strength when you do sets of 10. It's not probably quite the same as if you're doing a heavy set of 3, and you can build hypertrophy when you're doing a heavy set of 3. It maybe not be the same as you're doing a set of 10, but these things aren't mutually exclusive. Like they come, like you're probably just biasing those qualities as opposed to like saying, okay, this thing is only doing hypertrophy, this thing is only doing power expression, this thing is only doing max strength. So keeping that in mind too. Yeah, like I think it's, you kind of approach it like you do like an off season, like general capacity and like hypertrophy early in the off season, maybe a little bit more strength as you get closer, and then maybe a little bit more power expression. It just kind of depends. That timeline's probably a little bit more extended. You may go back and forth between like, accumulation and like intensification, quote unquote, like, all right, more hypertrophy biased, more strength biased. And you could go back and forth for blocks of those if you're dealing with like a super long-term rehab, because you don't need to rush back into like, quote unquote, like the power expression side of things, now that you're not going to touch that throughout your program. But that's kind of I would focus on that. And like I said, it depends on like the injury too. Like if a guy has like a hand or like a finger injury, like they can't grip a bar, you can still work. Yeah, it changes things. It changes things. So like that, it depends on like where the injury is, what the limitations are. So
I think there's at a certain point we don't, I guess I mentioned we don't value like the volume, but we also don't, we overlook the range of motion. It gets placed an emphasis when you're like, I got to shorten the range of motion, but nobody really kind of goes in there and says this needs to get longer. Or they'll look at like those mid-range exercises like a squat, and they'll say, well, I need you to get a little bit lower, this and that and the other. But nobody's like taking that resiliency work and saying like, how deep can we take this? Can we go extreme range of motion or end range of motion and provide tension on that muscular tissue, again, at length? And when you do, obviously, like you have DOMs, so like you got to pick where you can put it. But to a certain extent, there will always be some kind of benefit that you'll get from it, even if you just think of it as like, I hate the name of like a recovery day. It's not a recovery day. You're adding stimulus to somebody. So, but in those days where you're backing off and you want like the good amount of blood flow back into the system,
right?
You can use those extreme, like at length exercises, those at length times, because it's going to induce blood flow. You will likely get a nutrient response if they're eating appropriately.
Just reduce the intensity.
Yeah.
That's your recovery day.
I was going to say, this goes back to an argument, not an argument, but like a comment you've made way, way back when, this might have been 7 months ago, when you let the modality of the exercise dictate the intensity versus like, hey, you're going to do goblet squats and it's going to be far less fatiguing than if I'm going to have you load up the same percentage on a front squat. But we just swap that out. You still feel like you're trying, but at the same time, like I know for a fact that we've like pulled off of you.
Yeah, I did that for like our quote unquote deload week a few weeks ago when we were about to start a new program. I just kept the intensity high and just switched the movement. We went from barbell bench to dumbbell bench. I still had guys doing like heavy triples, but their heavy triple on a dumbbell is still considerably more lighter than their heavy triple on a barbell. Had them do a pit shark or a heavy leg press instead of like the squats we were doing. You can load up whatever, like 7 plates on the pit shark. It's still not going to be as stressful as like
no axial loading, squat. Baby.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that. So it's Yeah, that's a good point there. God, there was one more thing I was gonna say. Well, also people are afraid of like the soreness, but if you never expose yourself like
You're gonna be sore with
to that,
everything.
you're gonna sore regardless. Like, so you have to like, if you just keep that in your training, like it's like if you do a Nordic curl for the first time or do it for the first time in a long time, you get blown the fuck
You're gonna
up,
be
right?
sore.
But if you do them consistently, like you're still gonna be a little bit sore, but like
You'll be
not
fine.
as much. Yeah, not as much. That's the kicker is like people want to get away from that, but if you get away from it, then you're gonna really be blown up if you try to introduce it again. So I think like keeping it in there at all times in some capacity is super important. And I agree like with the premise that like a lot of people will go to shorter range of motion stuff like in season, like whatever it's like pin squats, elevated like rack pull, this and that. I get that, but you still need to. I still think you should fit full range of motion within like your accessory work. And it's also different too because like I'm not going to just do pin squats for 6 months if it's a 6-month season.
Yeah, like we obviously being at the tail end of our indoor block, a little bit more reduced range of motion, especially with our throwers, obviously. But we're working into like split squats and reverse lunges, which is far more reduced than a front squat. Like a front squat is a super deep range of motion. Mm-hmm. Obviously, coming back in Thursday, we had our Friday, we had our lift day. I was like, hey girls, we're gonna get some front squat back into this in the early outdoor season. So you better get ready for a pretty tough progression. 8x2, 8x3, 16x2, 20x1.
Right.
Get after it.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I feel like it's I'm being oversimplistic in the fact that I'm saying like, yeah, you should do it. It's not just for one reason. Like you should be doing it at all times, whether you want to say it's for hypertrophy, whether you want to say it's for like tissue resiliency, whether you want to say it's like for better induced blood flow, like
put any name on it. It's those are 3 positives that you should be doing.
Right. It's all of the above.
Yeah,
in my opinion. So
I think it's worth doing. Plus, nobody ever cried about being too jacked.
Yeah, that's the main point of this whole thing.
Guy's throwing shirtless videos of himself carrying chains at the facility.
That's right. Jesus walks, baby.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, but that's no, it's definitely interesting to think about though. Like, and that's people will say like, okay, like I don't think one type of modality like cables versus plate loaded, pin loaded machines, dumbbells, barbells, none of them is like superior to
another.
Yeah, like you can argue down to like the nitty gritty that some things are probably better for certain exercises or certain like movement patterns because of how you can load them or like the point of resistance. But at the end of the day, like training like at a high intensity, like proximity to failure is what's going to get you like results. And you can do that with machines. You can do that with dumbbells, barbells, machines, this and that. I think some things are better than others for certain reasons, but they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. It's a lot of it is like based on like what you have, the time you have,
and what you're training for.
Yeah, and what you're training for. So I do think it's really cool that like companies are coming out, like Prime, for example. They have like you can change the resistance curve, like to have it be like, okay, I want the movement to be really hard at end range or mid range or the other end range, like the shortened position. So I think that's really cool. I think it's really cool, but it's definitely not like super necessary. Like you can figure out how to do stuff like that and like challenge muscles at different ranges of motion with just barbells and dumbbells, benches, just getting creative. So
yeah, you don't necessarily need a $10,000 piece of equipment that we all want.
No, don't need it.
Should we wrap this bad boy up?
Yeah, man, that was a banger. It was probably one of our longest episodes, so we're gonna split it into 2 parts. But yeah, going hour, just eclipsed the hour 45 mark here. So we'll go ahead and review this bad boy here. This is really good. I think I like it even a little bit more than the Sour Patch Kids flavor, which it's just a little bit sweeter. Like it's not super super sweet, but I really like it. As always, like we're a big fan of Ghost. I would say Ghost flavors. This could like crack my top five. Probably rounding out the 4-5 spot. It's pretty damn good. Again, I don't know if I could. I don't know if it's a daily driver, but I don't. I think I could definitely gas quite a few of these before I get tired of it. I picked up 2, thankfully, so I'll probably have that one tomorrow or later this week. I think overall, got this for like a 2 for $5.50 deal at the QT Quick Trip. Pretty good deal. Less than $3 for 2 really solid energy drinks. Man, I think I'm gonna have to go. I'm gonna have to go 8.5 on this.
Oh, I was so close. I would just guessed. I just mouthed 8.7.
Yeah, I have to go 8.5. Really, really solid drink. Ghost Blue Raspberry. Would definitely recommend.
I like that we finally have like a blue raz that is like that blue icy.
Yeah, like this is up there with Blue Raz flavors. I think this and the Razzleberry Rain are probably
The 2 best.
yeah, flavor wise. I like the Gorilla
Yeah.
Mind because like obviously the formula, but I don't like the flavor quite as much. But this flavor, Blue Raspberry, this and the Razzleberry Rain, top notch. And that one you're holding in your hand.
This one's not quite just blue raz though. Like it really does have
sour,
like
a little bit sour.
yeah, it's that sour like that sour punch straw. It really does taste like a sour punch straw, like down to like you can almost taste like the gummy like aspect to it. Super good. Rise is one of those just sleeper ones that when they turn out like a good flavor collab, it doesn't get enough respect that it deserves. It is super good. Like again, super good formula. Can looks sick. You know, it's got the Sour Punch logo on there, but the Rise logo is just so clean. It's simplistic. They do a really nice job. Quickly on this one, just because it was a good deal. They're not super expensive. I think I got it for like $2.89, which for energy drinks nowadays, that's not bad at all. Ingredient profile, like I listed before, is good. Is it the top one? No, but is it one of those like sleeper formulas that
Underrated.
like getting the choline in there it's big time, and it's 200 milligrams of choline. Like that's awesome. But overall, I'm gonna go 8.1 on the Rise Sour Punch Straw.
I wrote 7.9 down. I was close.
Oh,
We're close.
see, I really liked it. Now for this bastard, the near full can of Liquid Death Tropical Terror. Can looks great. Love it. I think that's so sick. Price, got it for $1. Incredible. Ingredients, this is where we falter. It's only got 100 milligrams of caffeine, and I think, 10 or 40 milligrams, 10% of magnesium. So it's not like you're getting the great magnesium intake too that might help you out. Really bad on that formula. Taste. I'm gonna hold it against it because it's pina colada, and these motherfuckers should have said it's pina colada. I get Tropical Terror tells me that might be like pineapple mango.
Mango, yeah.
Like I think mango, I think pineapple, maybe guava. I don't think pina colada. I think maybe more like a tropical punch. Pina colada might be the worst energy drink flavor next to cotton candy. I will stand on this. I will die on this hill. 2.4.
Holy shit, that's bad. Okay.
I hate pina colada.
All right. Glad it was you, not me. Glad you had a good one though to save the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you have it, folks. We had some good drinks. We had a really bad drink. Had some good talks. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Again, you know where you can find us on all the socials, bedboys.tv, our personal Instagrams. Check us out, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Make sure to subscribe, leave a review. Really helps us with the algorithm if you do enjoy the show. You can find the full video version on Spotify and YouTube. Instagram, like I said, make sure to follow us on there. We're hoping to get a few more guests here as we go into, as a busy part of the year for both of us, but I think we're still able to get a little bit of some really cool guests in the near future. So Oh, and trucker hats are live on the site, bedboys.com. Buy yourself a trucker hat. We have another version coming out pretty soon, I think later today. So a couple different versions should be on the site as of this release. So if you like trucker hats, if you like the dad hat, go buy a trucker hat. Check it out.
Get one for every day of the week.
That's right. Buy 7. That's right. T-shirts as well, sweat, hoodies, whatever you guys need. So appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Peace.